welcome everyone, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, who is Nikolaus Schindel. He is the head of the Numismatics department at the Austrian Academy of Sciences and is best known for his work on Sasanian numismatics, I think, but works on all kinds of late antiquity, early Byzantine numismatics, pre-Islamic, Islamic, Ottomans. He was the winner of the Ashoka Prize for the best paper in the Journal of the Oriental Numismatic Society last year for a paper on Ottoman numismatics. And without further ado.
Thanks, Pankaj, for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me here. And it was Pankaj's suggestion that I talk about Sasanian numismatics, more specifically to give you a rough overview where we are. And I will divide this presentation into two parts. The first will basically, give you some also personal insight from my side, where we were when I started working on Sasanian coins, also already a quarter of a century ago, where we are now, what has changed in these last 25 years. And in the second part, I will address some topics in Sasanian numismatics, in the research on Sasanian coins, that might be of relevance on the one hand for understanding the coins, but also maybe today we should say potentially also have a relevance for Sasanian history, Sasanian administration, and making sense of late antique Iran as a whole. So when I started with my PhD thesis in 1997, the basic work of reference was Robert Scoebel's Sasanian Numismatics, originally published in 1968. Then an English translation was produced in 1971, which is really just the translation. Even the not so infrequent errors of the German version, misattributions on the plates, etc., are repeated. So it's really just a translation and not even a augmented or whatever version. Has been reprinted in the 1990s. Both versions are not so easy to get. And still, it's the only book that is, on the one hand, covering the entire period of Sasanian coinage, and which, on the other hand, from a methodological point of view, can be regarded as kind of state of the art. There were other earlier books by Paruk and so on, but they're all, despite their great merits, especially in the context of the history of research, they are not, because on one hand, the large number of coins that emerged ever since their publication, and also because of some flaws in the presentation and analysis of the material, are not of the same value as Goebbels' work, which now, being almost 50 years old, more than 50 years actually, is also kind of dated, but still the basic outlines on Sasanian numismatics as presented by Goebbels still remain the same. Pretty much the most important tool when I started working on these coins was the Central Card Index at the Institute of Numismatics, because then, basically before the advent of modern technologies, the main way of gathering material, numismatic material, that is, was on the one hand, collect coins, like these various museum collections, which built the core of SNS, Paris, Berlin, and Vienna. And on the other hand, this collection of coin photos, normally black and white, one-to-one scale images on pieces of paper that have been collected in Vienna since the 1970s, and which certainly constitute a major source, even if compared to the amount of material available today, we will see that they are certainly much, much less numerous and thus less helpful. And excavation coins, which are always of great importance, especially when it comes to the base metal coins that normally don't make their way that easily into collections, public or private. The older publications of excavations, be it in Iran, in Iraq, or in Central Asia, are of great importance. We'll come back to this, I hope, later. Then nowadays, when I did begin to work on SNS4, my PhD thesis, I forgot to tell them, my PhD thesis was SNS3. That's the period from 309. the beginning of the reign of Sharpa II to 531, the death of Karat I. And I basically wrote the entire book using card file and writing the catalog in Word. So I didn't type it on a typo machine, an old-fashioned one, but on a computer. But apart from that, much of the material and much of the way I did the work would have been the same when Goebel wrote his book in 1968. When I started a few years afterwards working on the next volume, Syllogonomorum Sasanidorum, Volume 4, it covers the long reign of Khusro I, 531 to 578. I could fully make use of the new technologies, tools that have arrived in earnest ever since. So that means that on the one hand, I did this not with a paper card file, but with a database. Apart from this, also the number of coins available for study has drastically increased, especially due to the advent, on the one hand, of digital photography, and on the other hand, due to the possibility to present material easy and cheaply on the internet, like here, sino.ru from our Russian friend Vladimir Belayev, which publishes and makes accessible a lot of coins, or mostly from, also to a large extent from private collections, which otherwise would not be available for study or available only if a lot of effort and time traveling there and recording the coins is taken. And so they can access collections from all over the world via the internet, which makes it much easier. I started working on the new volume that was finished in summer of 2020, but because of some problems with the printing process, the publishing house has been delayed until now. So I hope that the book will be produced and delivered to the vendors in very early 2023. But this book was done using a database, which gave me a lot of advantages in working in the material, also in making sense of the actual coins, because you can see a lot of details better on digital images that can be enlarged than in the old one-to-one images. As I said, the emergence of databases that present coins not otherwise accessible is a great plus. And also museum collections that are known and have been visited for decades now have a lot, if certainly not all of their holdings available online, which also makes it easier, quicker, and cheaper to make use of the material, as long as you're legally allowed to do that, which is another problem. But that's nothing we have to discuss right here. This is just a look at the online catalog of Sasanian coins, keyword Sharpa II from the ANS in New York. And I mean, you can easily see, I mean, I don't want to put one over them here, but you can easily see that with large collections, which house hundreds of thousands or millions of objects, one certainly cannot expect, since putting the material online started only in the new millennium, we cannot certainly not expect all the holdings, and especially more obscure ones, if you're honest, like Sasanian coins, to be completely available on the net by now. We also have much more material from the coin trade available now on the internet. I mean, in Vienna, we always used to collect auction catalogs and to receive catalogs from most companies at the Institute of Numismatics for decades. But I guess that many scholars who do not subscribe to dozens of various companies have found it more difficult to gather these catalogs and to get access to these coin catalogs like 20 or 30 years ago, before the emergence of these online offers. And what you can also see here on this screenshot from one of the metadata bases for auction houses is that nowadays, compared to like 20 or 50 years ago, apart from gold and silver coins, also copper and lead ones from the Sasanian period, it used to be of no collector's interest and almost no economic value, are now much more readily available, which has enlarged us to understand typology, and other patterns better than before, even if coming from the trade, the provenance and the information on coin circulation certainly is lost to us. We also have the availability of literature online, be it on like enterprises like Academia Edu, where various scholars can upload their research, or on institutional sites, like, for example, the online presence of the Revue Numismatique. So all that makes access to material and access to research much easier nowadays than it was like 20 or 30 years ago. Just to show you the covers of the main series volumes of the Syllogia Numorum Socinidarum. It's not in chronological sequence as the coins are covered, but in chronological sequence of the volumes as they appear 2003, 2004, and 2012. And I hope that volume 4 will, well, appear in 2023. Now, I will have a short look, just 2 minutes or so, at the way these various improvements in the availability of research and material had an impact on the production of scientific work, scientific papers on Sasanian numismatics. I'm using here this bibliography by Turaj Dariari and Andrea Garibaldi, which covers maybe not everything, but most of the studies of Sasanian coins up to about 2010. Mention certainly should be made of the first contribution where Sasanian coins and their inscriptions were properly understood by Sylvestre de Saussy from 1793, kind of the starting point for Sasanian numismatics. It also tells us that compared to the study of Roman numismatics, where 17th century studies are still of scientific value, because of the history of research they had already in the second half of the 17th century, Sasanian numismatics got started really only in the 19th century, and rather in the middle of the 19th century with the work of people like Mortman and the like. So we're really behind both in publication of material, presentation of material, and also of making sense and analyzing these materials. We're really like 200 or 300 years behind Greek and Roman numismatics. And what is interesting is, if you look at these chart I produced on the one hand from the paper by Turaj and Andrea, and on the other hand, on my own presentation of Sasanian numismatic studies for the last 2 volumes of the Survey on Numismatic Research, which certainly also are not totally complete, but should be more or less comprehensive. What we see here is that actually the peak of the numbers of studies that has appeared dates to a period before all these electronic resources made the impact felt. So it seems as if the number of publications is going down a little bit. I mean, on the one hand, I have included here almost everything that was listed in the various bibliographies, be it monographs like Goebbels' 1971 book, or be it just 2 or 3 page articles, like many of the earlier publications by Goebel, like also some short treatments of various Sasanian kings in collectors' magazines. But seen as a whole, it seems that basically since material and research on Sasanian numismatics has become much more easily available, the number of actual research being published has not increased, but decreased a little bit, which I find a little bit weird, so to say. But I mean, that's that. And I cannot imagine that I missed so much literature that like 50 or 100 titles for the last 2 decades should be added, that we still have increase in publications like from, I don't know, the 1960s to the 1970s. I also wanted shortly to mention once again, using the example of Robert Goebel, how, especially in times before this large increase in the 70s and 80s, the impact of single researchers could make itself felt, because we see that in the 1950s and 1960s, almost even more than 1/3 of all publications on Sasanian coinage was the work of one man, in this case, Robert Goebel. I mean, he died in 1997, so in the 90s, his impact certainly is less relevant, but still it can be of quite some impact. So much for a short, somehow delayed overview on the methods and tools and their impact on research. Basically, what this means is that actually we should have more research coming out on Sasanian numismatics. I also have the impression, I mean, being not that more than a few months out of university myself now, I have the impression that compared to maybe like when I started in the 90s, nowadays there is maybe fewer young people who start working on Sasanian numismatics. I mean, start serious numismatic work on Sasanian numismatics. Well, let's see what will happen. And I will now address a few topics. None of them really new, maybe, but still to give you just an idea about what new trends or what new ideas and concept, new, not, I mean, as of November 2022, but new compared, say, to the perspective of Goebel and the kind of pre-SNS understanding of Sasanian numismatics, also emphasizing that much of these numismatic results could have relevance not only for numismatic studies in themselves, but also for further fields of Iranian studies, Sasanian historiography, Sasanian administrative historiography, and so on and so on. One topic that was one of the raison d'etre for producing Xylogenemorum Sasanidarum is typology. In methodological terms, one of the main advantages of Goebel about earlier studies, like, for example, Paruk and the like, was his clear-cut typology. But clear-cut and easy to understand as it was, it certainly concentrated on the main lines of development and necessarily left aside a lot of the minor details. So it was not an error or an omission of Goebel. It was rather that to produce a first sound typological overview and typological analysis of Sasanian numismatics, he had to leave the kind of less relevant details aside to concentrate on the main lines of development. But now, as Goebel's work has been firmly established for more than a quarter of a century, in the context of SNS, we tried to go one step further in the hope that a more detailed typological analysis might give us more insights for various questions, open questions in Sasanian numismatics. And here, one example, the obvious typology in Goebel is dictated entirely by the crowns, which are individual for most Sasanian rulers, at least until the 6th century. And so to make the various kings easily recognizable, Goebel just reproduced drawings of their individual crowns, like here in the case of Wachram V in the 5th century. If you look on the obvious image as a whole, however, you can see that there are some minor typological differences in the corpus of Wachram V's coins, which allows us to distinguish these three typological variants. And if you wonder what's the difference between 1A and 1B, it is these minor things here below the bust. It could be flames or branches. More probably it's flames as a symbol for the Khwara, the symbol of royal splendor, royal glory in Sasanian Iran. And that's one of the things where the modern technology comes in handy, because here, it's a little bit obscured by this, but anyway, here this is the breast ornament, like here in the middle of the bust. And here you see these three rather obscure objects. Nowadays, with digital images that you can blow up and enlarge on your screen to 10 times, 20 times the original size, it's much easier to see these things, these small details. I mean, this is something that has been invented, so to say, on Sasanian coins by Wachram IV. in the very late 4th century, and it's attested until Peros. And when I wrote SNS3, I didn't find out that it was attested for Peros, even if I was the first one to distinguish this element on Sasanian coins at all in a systematic way, but only after I started to do, I think, SNS Shaf, which was entirely based on digital photos, did I find out that you have these flames also on a few coins of Peros, even a few coins I myself had published in SNS3, but not having seen really clear specimens before, I had not become aware of the fact this detail exists for Peros as well. And only after I saw the enlarged images of these Peros coins in the Shaf collection, which are better preserved than most of the SNS coins, did I recognize, oops, this phenomenon stretches until the early reign of Peros. So you really, here it's not that you have to get better or more intelligent or your eyes have to be better. It's just that larger images make it easier for you to distinguish, to make out, and to see such small elements. That's it. In some cases, the typology might look needlessly convoluted, like here, Vachram IV, which is, however, the kind of worst example for the very convoluted typology of any of the Sasanian coins I dealt with so far. And while the minor details might look, well, not as relevant as, say, typological differences tend to be, say, in Roman Imperial coinage, where you have a much more clear-cut typology, it still can help us not only to describe the individual coins more accurately, because that's, I mean, in the end, the point of doing typology to describe as comprehensively as possible what we see on each individual coin, and then group them by their various type variants, etc. But it can also help us understand the patterns of minting. And one of the major problems, one of the major research questions in Sasanian numismatics is where the coins were struck. Basically, for the first about 200 coins of 200 years of Sasanian coinage, there is no mint indications, apart from a few rare exceptions. And then from about 400 to the end of Sasanian rule, most silver coins bear an abbreviated form of their mint place on the reverse, normally at 3 o'clock. That's pretty much the same thing like on late Roman coins, where it's in the exerg on the reverse at 6 o'clock. Same kind of abbreviation. The only problem being that on the one hand, the number of Roman mints is much lower. And on the other hand, it's much easier to make sense of the Roman mint abbreviations, not because the abbreviations as such are more difficult to understand in Sasanian Iran. It's exactly the same system. You abbreviate the place name, normally with the first few letters of its name, but because our sources and our understanding of Roman administrative geography is much better developed than in Iran. So if we have a Roman or Byzantine coin, which has Con in the exerg, well, it's clear that this is Constantinople, whereas when we have a Sasanian coin, which has WH at 3 o'clock, like the coin here to the right, it was not as easy to make sense of what this WH mean. And I mean, these WH coins are not rarities. It's one of the most common mint signatures in Sasanian times, which led to it being equated with Veardeshir, another name for one of the parts of the city complex of Seleucia Ctesiphon, i.e. The Sasanian capital. But that was pretty much the most common attribution until the early 2000s. And then when I did SNS 3 and had a look at the coins of Vachram IV, this is nothing new, obviously. I mean, I published this the first time, I think, in 2004, but still to give you an idea about the use of typological analysis. Then when I did the SNS 3 in 2004, I found out that these three mints share not only their style, but also some typological details, like, for example, the lack of the upper ribbons. If you see here, let's move back up a little bit. You have on the one hand the distinction between the group A, where both wings are shown, something like this, whereas on B you have only one wing shown. And then you have the treatment of the ribbons that hold together that bundle of hair, the corimbos above the ruler's head, if they're depicted like both pointing to the left, one to the left, one to the right, and so on. These minor details that you can see here in these not very artful drawings kind of constitute stylistic and typological groups when you analyze the coinage as a whole. So we see here that none of these coins show these upper ribbons. It's communis opinio that AW refers to almost Ardashir, that's Ahwas in southern Iran. I or Ail refers to Eran Khwara Shapur, Susa, once again situated in Khuzestan, once again in modern Iran. And WH should be Ctesiphon, that's in Iraq, far away from Khuzestan, and a completely different geographical setting. And that gave me the idea that WH does not refer to Ve'ardashir, that is to say Ctesiphon, but rather to Antioch Shapur, Jundi Shapur, as foundation of Shapur I, also in Khuzestan, and actually one of the most important and largest cities in Sasanian times, which interestingly enough, otherwise would not have a mint signature, which we don't know for sure according to which arguments or according to which reasons Sasanian mints were set up. But it would seem, at least if you compare it with the Shahristani Eran Shahr sources on geography from the Sasanian period, that most of the major urban centers in Sasanian Iran had their own mints. So the absence of mint activity in Jundi Shapur would be, for Sasanian minting practices, a most unusual thing. And now if you look at another group, another style group, I think we can make out why that is so. To the left, we have a coin from AS that was commonly equated with Isfahan, which was really a very bad idea because Isfahan, starting with a vowel, was an introduction of the Arabs, because in Arabic, you cannot have a place name that commences with two consonants. And so Isfahan is an Arabic form of the name, very much like Smyrna is Izmir in Arabic, and Izmir certainly is a Turkish name, but it's a name constructed according to Arabic rules. And the Sasanian period name of Isfahan is Spahan, which doesn't begin with an A, but with an S. So AS being Isfahan, it's just impossible. And despite that, even Goebbels advocated this equation. Then we know that BBA, the most problematic mint signatures of them all, is Dar, the royal court. And since we assume, and we have a lot of sources for the late Sasanian period, we assume that also in the 4th and 5th centuries, Ctesiphon was the main residence of the Sasanian kings. The idea is, well, natural that Ctesiphon was where the king resided. And if you have a court mint, that it normally would have been located in Ctesiphon. Now, AS can either be Aspanva, one of these parts of the city complex of Ctesiphon, or probably more likely Asuristan, which is not Assyria, but Babylonia, unfortunately, and the region where Ctesiphon is situated. And the fact that, once again, both typology and style are the same for AS and for BBA advocates, in my opinion, for them being both located in Ctesiphon, at least normally in the case of the itinerant mint BBA, whereas WH, which had a lot of parallels with mints in Khuzestan, an area situated to the east, southeast of Asuristan, is completely different, both when it comes to style and when it comes to typology. So here we can say that apart from style, which is also always a very problematic and very subjective matter, typology, which is a little bit easier to define, helps us understanding also the question of where coins were struck. Another topic that has emerged is the relationship between center and periphery, which is often addressed nowadays in studying and trying to make sense of ancient empires. For the 4th century, once again, Bahram IV, you can easily see that the mint AS, once again, Asurik Stanktesiphon, and the coin from the east, Marv, in present-day Turkmenistan, look very much different. I mean, on the one hand, they both attest imperial control, because we don't have a Marv Shah, some local ruler. We have on both coins the same king, Bahram IV, being depicted with the same rivers, fire altar, 2 attendants, bust in the flames. It's the same typology. The typology as such is imperial. There's no difference in the basic typology, but almost every aspect, the size of the flange, which is much broader in Eastern Iran, minor typological details, the quality and the form of the legends, style as a whole are markedly different. So we see that the mint personnel in Ctesiphon and the mint personnel in Marv were different people with different artistic traditions, in some cases at least. If we look to the 6th century, to the period of Khusro I, we are here in the middle of that 6th century. We have here once again a coin from AS, Ctesiphon, a coin from ML, the abbreviation for Marv. So both well-established equations. And we can see here that not only the basic typology is the same, but also stylistic execution is the same. My explanation for this is that by this period, dies were no longer made locally in the various mints, sometimes for one single mint, sometimes for various mints, like in Khuzestan, where apparently the dies were produced centrally for the entire region. But anyway, in this period, at the latest, and we can trace this system back to Peros in the 2nd half of the 5th century, we see a centralization in that dies were now produced in the center, obviously in Ctesiphon, and then sent to mints throughout the entire realm, because we now cannot any longer distinguish any local differences in style or typological details for the entire Sasanian Empire. In that regard, I have to emphasize, the Sasanian Empire of the 6th century is much more uniform than the Byzantine Empire, because under Justinian, great Byzantine emperor and opponent of Khusro I, we still have a lot of typological, denominational, and also stylistical difference between, say, the mint of Constantinople, Alexandria, Spain, Rome, etc., etc. So this uniformity, which is reached in the Sasanian Empire, you never find in the Roman period. We can arguably in the Tetrarchic period, you have more typological uniformity for those few years when there was no civil war going on. But apart from that, this is a much more uniform coin production than we can observe for Roman imperial and early Byzantine periods. Another topic that was of interest and of relevance is internal chronology. Just a short example. We have 2 minor typological variants for Vaikash, rather obscure ruler in the 5th century, 484 to 488. One with a legend on the rivers, here, if they generated, another one without. And while normally coin legends become shorter or dropped as time goes by, in this case, the statistical comparison of the left coin with a drachm of Vaikash's brother and predecessor, Peros, who was killed in battle in 484. And on the right side, with his successor, Kabad I, proves that the coins that look more like Peros issues have to be earlier, and those that look more like Kabad I, which more commonly bear a Rivers legend at 9 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, you have the mean signature anyway. Artis Arishe Khwara Goa in Fars in Iran. But that we can here build at least 2 chronological groups, one early, one late. These coins are undated. A few years later, under Tzamash, brother and enemy of Kabad, regal dates are introduced for good on Sasanian coins, but here we still don't have dates on the coins, and here style and typology can be used to establish at least an internal chronology of otherwise undated coins. And then to show that we also have, after these new catalogs for SNS that have come out, that's certainly not the end, far be it from that, that sometimes you even can find out new typological details. Once again, the use of digital images that can be enlarged comes in handy here. In SNS 3, I, following Goeber, attributed all coins of the first reign of Kavad I to one basic type, obverse and reverse type 1/1. Now, we don't know exactly, I mean, we don't know, we hardly know anything about the biographies and the personal lives of any of the Sasanian kings. In the case of Kavad, there is two different traditions, both in Oriental sources like Tabari and the like, and also in Greek sources like Procopius and the like. According to one, he was a young boy when his father was killed. According to the other one, he was already grown up. So either he was young or he was old. When, I mean, he was either a boy, like 16 or so, or was already a grown-up man when he became king of kings. And the traditions, the sources we have, the written sources, I mean, do not really permit a clear-cut decision because they contradict each other. And through source criticism, you don't arrive at a really reliable answer. But the coins can help us. Now it's well known, once again, if you look to the Roman world, that you can observe emperors growing up on coins. 3 coins of Caracalla, one very early issue where he's still depicted like a boy, then a young man, and then in the end, a grown-up man shortly before he was killed. We can see not only the facial expression, which is something which is too individual for Sasanian coins to reflect it, but that's what I want to put emphasis on here, the way how his beard is depicted, because a boy certainly doesn't have a beard. Then growing up, he has first beard growing here on his cheek, and in the end, he has a full beard with mustache. And if you now look once again more closely on these 2 coins I showed you before, which in SNS were just type 1, obverse type 1 full stop, we see that the first coin to the left has a border of dots, a row of dots on the chin, which is indicating beard. It has a mustache, which is hardly visible due to weak striking, that spot here, but it's there. Whereas the other coin not only has a clear mustache, but I mean, once again, that's the preservation of the coin. It's not the typological difference, but you can easily see here a row of dots on the chin, but also here below the mouth, several strokes, which indicate a stronger and more pronounced beard. And that gave me the idea that the one coin shows Kavad at a younger stage, at a younger age, with a not fully grown beard, and the second coin shows him having grown up. And this makes sense only if we assume that, I think it was Procopius' version, that he was a Nianiskos, a young man, around 16 or so in 488, is correct. He was not yet grown up, and that he still had to age, and that this aging process of the king who ascended the throne is not yet fully grown up, is in fact depicted on the coins. In the 7th century, we have a few kings, Ardashir III, were shown without beard because they were so young that they had no beard yet. With other kings, a beardless king Khusru, the interpretation is a little bit more difficult, and bearded queen Atsamidush, that's a different thing altogether, because their old dies of her predecessors were used with just recut names on the dies. But anyway, we have here apparently, and I mean, this is just a hypothesis I presented some time ago, we have here apparently the phenomenon that you also can see, even if less clear-cut, certainly because the rules of how a ruler is depicted work differently in Iran than in Rome. I mean, especially 3rd century Rome, comparing that even with 5th century or 6th century Byzantium would give a completely different way how imperial portraits are constructed. Even Justinian, Phocas, and Justine I are shown on the coins in a different fashion from Caracalla and would be more in an Iranian approach, so to say. So 5th, 6th century Roman coin portraits would be more in line with contemporary Sasanian ones than with Roman portraits from the 1st or 2nd or 3rd century, early 3rd century on the Roman coins. Another topic, and I will come to an end soon. Another topic are the astral symbols. It's a very typical Sasanian thing to put objects like crescents or a combination of crescent and star outside the rims. As far as I know, this is innovation by the Sasanians. And whatever to make of these changes between the various kings, we can see that we have to the left Kavad I, who was the first king to use such astral symbols on coins. His son Kuzo I has, rather than his father's combinations of crescent and star, just a crescent. Hormuz IV, the son of Khusro, returns to Kavad's crescent and star combination, and Bahram VI, a usurper who did not belong to the Sasanian royal dynasty, returns, the only king to do so, to the patterns of Kuzo I. Now we know that Kavad I was described in the Oriental sources, Tabari and the like, as a bad ruler who fought against the nobility and the priests and was in favor of this bad guy Mazdag, a religious, social, whatever, reformator, revolutionizer. Khusro was a more lawful ruler who returned to the traditional way of organizing the society, and Hormuz IV once again had a bad reputation. But I don't think that a Sasanian king, I thought that presented it maybe in a slightly awkward way in SNS 3, but I don't think nowadays that a Sasanian king who, whether it's Kavad I, Kuzo I, or Hormuz IV, could only rule by cooperating with large parts of the nobility, because I mean, in a kind of pre-feudal state like Sasanian Iran, it's impossible to do kind of a communist policy where you totally disregard the existing military elites and just cooperate with peasantry. So we know that also from the sources that these kings, anti-nobility, the so-called anti-nobility kings, like once again Kavad I or Hormuz IV, also cooperated with noblemen, maybe with different families and different branches than their more accepted successors. But I don't think that Hormuz IV put this combination of crescent and star on the coins to tell the nobility, I don't like you, because I mean that just gets you killed quickly, because doesn't look like a good idea. But still, we have here these minor typological details which are used throughout all these reigns. So none of these kings changes these astral symbols during his entire rule. So it's kind of a statement, and there is some hidden code or hidden meaning behind that, which maybe cannot fully understand yet, but which once again might give us an insight into, in the broader sense, royal ideology, royal propaganda. And I think since it's now more than 1 hour, despite all these interruptions and the short departure to Kushan and Kushan as Sasanians, I think I'll leave it with that, so that we also can have some discussion. And I thank you for the present and for your patience.